I'm Nabila, and today I'm going to be walking you through my classic dress pattern, which is available to purchase on Etsy. The link will be down below. Just like in my Sunshine Tea video, I'm going to be using my patterns at half size to save fabric, but I have doubled the seam allowance so it won't be too confusing to follow along. The first step is to sew the darts on your front bodice. Fold up the darts by matching notches, sew and end the stitch at the center of the dart. Press that bulk towards the waist. The next step is optional for if you want pockets. Pin the front and back pocket linings to the front and back bodice pieces right sides together using notches for placement, and sew at a half seam allowance. Press that seam towards the pocket. Now, when I was sewing this sample, I forgot to do this, but the next step is to understitch at 1/8 towards the lining. That'll help everything lay flat. Next, you're going to sew the back center seam. So pin the back pieces right sides together and sew with 1/2 seam allowance. Now you'll assemble the front and back bodice pieces by pinning them right sides together at the shoulder and side seams, with the pockets if you're using them. Sew this at 1/2 seam allowance, and if you are using pockets, be sure to sew along that curve slowly to maintain the right amount of seam allowance. Press these seams towards the back for a neat finish. Next, for the skirt piece, you'll notice that my pattern just states the dimensions to cut to save paper. Join the ends of the skirt by placing them right sides together and pinning them. Sew with 1/2 seam allowance and press that seam towards the back. This is optional, but to make it easier to eyeball if my gathers are even later on, I'm placing the sewn seam in the middle and folding the pieces to double check that they're even, and then making a notch at those folded edges because that's where the side seam will be. To gather the skirt fabric, use 2 rows of basting stitches to distribute the gathers evenly. I'm sewing through just 1 layer of fabric here. Set your sewing machine to the longest stitch length and then sew over the top edge of that skirt fabric, first at 1/4 seam allowance. Once you finish that first row at 1/4 seam allowance, you'll do the second row at 1/2 seam allowance. Also, don't backstitch either row of stitches and leave yourself a long tail at the end. On one side of the basting stitches, you can tie a knot, and then on the other side with the long tail, you can pull them together to create a gather. Pin the gathered skirt to the waist of the bodice with right sides together. Aligning the side seams with the notches we made earlier will make it easier to eyeball if it's even. Take your time here. Once you're happy with the gathers, then sew the pieces at 1/2 seam allowance. When you're sewing this together, and if you did use pockets, just be sure to move your pockets out of the way while you're sewing so you don't sew them over. You can finish the armhole and neckline by either folding up 1/4 inch twice and edge stitching along that fold, or you can use bias tape. To use bias tape, first pin the bias tape right sides together along the neckline and sew at 1/4 inch seam allowance. For the short raw edge of the bias tape that faces outwards, I just tuck that under and sew. Then take the bias tape and fold it in half and half again and pin. Now edge stitch along the pinned neckline 1/8 inch away from the folded edge. Do the same with the armholes. I'm not doing that here because it won't fit in my machine, but you'll just finish them the same way. Finish the hem by folding at 1/4 inch and folding again at 1/2 inch, and then pin all the way around and sew at the edge of that fold. That'll be at about 1/8 inch. And you're done. And now you're done, and you have a perfect spring dress. I hope you enjoyed the video and saw how easy this dress is to make. If you want to pick up the pattern, you can do so at Etsy. The link will be down below. Thanks for watching. Bye!